Thank you all for coming for this post-lunch session, but also there was a bit of a confusion about the timing and the location, so we are grateful that you all navigated this. And if you landed here by chance, we're even more grateful. We will have a conversation. Saad's book, Radio Free Afghanistan, is a great chronicle of the past 20 years in Afghanistan through what was one of the most happening and sort of hopeful space, which was the media space. We will lean into the book, but we'll have a broader conversation on Afghanistan, on sort of Afghanistan-India relations, the media space. But we will begin with a period where all three of us overlapped in Afghanistan. Ambassador was there 2016 to 2018. Saad and I were there before and after it, but just as a starting point, we'll begin with that middle period where it was a period of hope. It could have gone either direction, that period. Just to give you some historic context for the conversation, Afghanistan was already in conflict for 3 decades by then. Then sort of the 9/11 attacks brought the Americans and their troops. And by 2016 and 17, it was clear that the Americans were leaving. But which way Afghanistan would go was unclear. There was still an effort to see if we could salvage something from the American departure. So if I can begin with you, Saad, when you're looking at that moment, that 2016-18 period, by then you've already set up a great media operation, and we'll get into how you got there. But when you're looking at that middle period, how are things from your perspective? What kind of a operation do you have going on? What is that media landscape in that middle period?
Thank you, Mujib. Well, I mean, Afghanistan was in a really interesting place in that there was a lot of enthusiasm, there was a lot of goodwill when it came to Afghanistan internationally in the early years. But the country itself really was underdeveloped, the population, relatively speaking, unsophisticated, impoverished, quite desperate actually. By 2015, 2016, what we noticed was the people started to change in a very organic way, not in a very sort of artificial way. But the state was weak, and the international enthusiasm was no longer there. And then it was a race against time. How quickly could the population continue to change and improve and sort of build capacity, that when the internationals abandoned Afghanistan, would we have the capacity to maintain the gains of the 2 decades? But I felt very optimistic when it came to the people of Afghanistan, but I felt very depressed when I looked at the government. We had elections in 2014. It was fraudulent, and it seemed to me that it could be the beginning of the end. I was hoping it wouldn't be, but at the same time, I was very enthused about the changes I was seeing on the ground.
And in terms of your immediate fields, the sort of the media operations that you had set up, what kind of sort of, give us a picture of the activity, the excitement, the routines that you had in that period, while it could have gone either direction. But your immediate space, what kind of activity were you seeing?
Well, I mean, if you look at Afghanistan, Afghanistan is the youngest country outside of sub-Saharan Africa. Median age is 18, something like 60 or 65% of the population is under the age of 20. Although literacy is like 35 or 40%, but if you look at the younger population, literacy is like in the 75, 80% mark. So you have two Afghanistans. You have a very young Afghanistan. You've got a sort of the older Afghanistan, which obviously, is not going to play much of a role, but it's a younger Afghanistan that we were hoping would step up to the plate, as we say. But the media reflected the new Afghanistan. The average age of our employee was like 24 or 25. Something like 40% of our employees were women of the essential staff. They were educated, they were enthusiastic, they were aspirational, So it gave us a lot of hope. But even today, I mean, we look at, and a lot of Afghans have left, but the remaining Afghans, the people who are still in our major cities, I mean, continue to give us quite a bit of hope. So I'm not sure if it's quite lost, and we can talk about this in a bit. But at that time, looking at the people of the country and looking at our own employees, there was no reason not to be hopeful.
Ambassador, you arrived in Kabul 2016. You had served in the region before, but you came from sort of South America. And you arrived in a period of a lot of activity in the Afghanistan-India relationship as well. What were your impressions of the Kabul that you arrived to and sort of the country that you were traveling in that period?
Well, thank you, Mujib and Saad. And can I first say what a great debt I owe to JLF and to Jaipur, that at least while the world might have forgotten Afghanistan, you guys haven't. So thank you for being here. You know, I arrived there in January 2016, and Saad's just sketched out a little bit of the landscape. It was in one word, I would say it was surreal to get there. For many, there were so many contradictions happening. There was a period of great hope and activity, economic activity, media activity, liberties to an extent that we can't even imagine today over there. It was also a period of significant despondency because the unraveling of the security situation initially and the certainty that the West and the Americans were abandoning Afghanistan was a dead cert for us. Those of us, we picked it up fairly quickly, and some of us analyzed where it's leading to, and that was a fairly grim and despairing picture. But at the same time, you've got to try and make sure that that picture doesn't come out that way and that people are able to change it, all of us collectively. So for me also, because bilaterally there was so much happening at that time, what we were doing for Afghanistan, attempting to do for Afghanistan, was such a full plate that it was also a period of great joy for me representing India, which was actually doing some wonderful stuff over there. The small development projects that we do over there make a difference. They cost 20 times less than what the average Western NGO or government aid would bring in, but the impact would be much faster in terms of both executing the project and getting it to run. Then we had these large, magnificent projects, such as the Afghan Parliament, a symbol of modern Afghanistan and its nascent democracy, which the Prime Minister Modi personally had traveled on the 25th of December 2015 for, and I was with him. This was 20 days before I reached there to become ambassador. And we did that, and 6 months later, Prime Minister Modi was back in Afghanistan, almost unheard of. I don't think Prime Minister Modi's ever been to two countries officially, twice in 6 months. He went to open this magnificent dam, which changed the energy landscape in Western Afghanistan, particularly the Salma Dam. All that was happening, but in the middle of it, the day I reached there, 20th of January, sadly was the day, Saad, that your bus with your big number of staff was attacked. Tolo TV, Saad's outfit, lost 7 journalists, 26 injured, 27 including the bus driver, the day I landed there. 3 months before that, Kunduz had fallen, which was a great shock to everybody. Of course, it was retaken in 3 days, but all that was happening. 2 weeks before I arrived, our consulate general in Mazar-e-Sharif had been attacked. 6 weeks after I reached there, on my wife's birthday, the 2nd of March 2016, our consulate in Jalalabad got attacked. So all that was happening. And we were grappling with multiple things. In the meantime, all the promise that organizations like Saad's, Tolo TV, Arman FM, other civil society groups, NGOs were doing wonderful things. Women were on the streets. There was education. There was participation. There was economic activity. There was buzz. There was music in the air. There was dancing as well. All that was also part of Kabul. And sadly, that was just 7 years ago.
And not just Kabul, because Kabul, that period was a deeply violent period. The ambassador and I were talking about one of the largest attacks that happened. It was this truck bombing right outside the German embassy that sort of, you know, smashed windows in the wide radius there and left, I don't know, dozens of people dead. Some bodies were never found just because of the size of the explosives that was in that truck. So it was this period where enormous violence for a small place was the constant part of daily reality, but at the same time, there was this struggle to see what can we pull out of this violence to make sure that this cycle doesn't remain. But your travels at that time were not limited to Kabul. You could still get around the country. And were you getting any sense of that are outside Kabul as well, that people are getting tense now, that this could start unraveling?
Yes, that was always there in every part of Afghanistan that I went to. Conversations would certainly be fairly concerned about the situation, the security situation, the sort of diktats that were coming out by, clerics here and there that, somebody can do this or not do that. All that had started. There was worry, but at the same time, the hopeful signs and the green shoots that I was talking about were not just restricted to Kabul. There was plenty of that visible all across Afghanistan.
I want to come to you, Saad, and want you to talk a little bit about what you built. But I know you will be modest, so I'm going to give a picture of what he actually built, and then I want to hear from you of how you built it and how you started it. What Saad built in Afghanistan was a massive, massive sort of independent, free media and entertainment landscape that country never had before. We came from sort of just a government television to radio stations to multiple TV channels, but they were pioneers because they were pushing the envelope. There's this impression that is exaggerated, I think, that Afghanistan in the 60s and 70s was this glorious place of, I hate this because this is the picture that always comes up, of a few women in short skirts walking around Kabul University. That was there, but that was tiny. That was a tiny, tiny elite. It still was a deeply poor country. It still was a deeply unequal country. It was still a majoritarian ethnic form of government. So from that space, this 20-year time, the kind of things that Saad and then others after him introduced was to tap into a country that could imagine a different future for itself. This was satire, there was music, there was questions being asked, tough questions of politicians. It was a very, very sort of vibrant space. How did you start? Take us to those early days of why did you want to do this? Where did you come from to do this? And how did you see the potential that this could be something promising?
Well, I think a lot of Afghans felt compelled to go back, to do something. And we had this opportunity to go and have a look at things, and my brother and I were in Kabul, and we looked at a whole bunch of things to invest in.
You lived abroad for a long time.
Yeah, I was the son of an Afghan diplomat, born in London. I had lived in Tokyo, Australia, Islamabad, but had not been back to Afghanistan since '78. Actually, I was there when the coup d'etat happened, before the Soviet invasion, but then we left soon after. So, but for a lot of Afghans, we never had closure. We always wanted to go back. And there were so many lost opportunities in the 90s and so forth. So and I've described in the book, that we flew from Dubai on board Ariana Airlines. It was so packed that the stewards were hanging on to the sides. They didn't have any seats. People were smoking in the front 6 seats. It was just like it was something from a Harrison Ford film. We landed in Kabul, and everyone was just falling over each other, trying to kiss the tarmac. It was a very emotional moment for a lot of people.
2002, 2001.
This is in March of 2002. And then we looked at a few opportunities, and one was media. And actually, Ahmed Rashid, the Pakistani author, mentioned to me, so listen, these folks at USAID, they're giving these small grants. And we thought, okay, we'll apply for one of these grants, and we secured, it was only a couple $100,000. we secured this grant to build a radio station, which we did. And then we went about, trying to figure out what people want. We did a survey of 1,000 households to see what they wanted. And the majority of people basically stated that they wanted religion and documentaries and classical music. And I said, well, this is complete BS. And we went with our instincts and we introduced a sort of pop culture in the country. And we hired people, men and women, and we had, a female DJ and a male DJ in the studio, which was very controversial. We had really, we had a lot of Bollywood music, we had Iranian music. We tried things, and this is the thing about being a small organization, you're nimble. And you can change very quickly, change course. But we kept on hiring people, and we basically said to people, do what you're good at. We gave people a lot of authority. You know most of these guys, they're household names nowadays. But they all started off with no experience. And it was fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I used to sit in the studio, and sometimes I'd be behind the microphone in order for them to feel more comfortable to speak in a more colloquial Dari or Pashto. But trial and error, and that's how we sort of developed the business.
Because one thing that you started off about how big a chunk of the population was young, when you started off, there was that culture of speaking very formal language on radio, on TV. People hear, the Doordarshan language still. You wanted to change sort of behavior as well of how this young energy comes to the space.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I got people who were not that well educated, like Moin Donashir, who'd barely finished college. But he had trouble speaking formally, so he was the best person to use for certain sessions, for example. And then sitting with them and working with them. But they adapted very quickly, and it's extraordinary how a country can change. You can never impose things. It's got to be very organic and natural. But it was to make it fun and to make it more as natural as possible.
One of in the early days when they started a television channel, they would run dubbed Hindi soap operas as well. And one of the most popular, I'm sure the ambassador heard this all the time, Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi. So Smriti Irani was very, very popular in Afghanistan. I think she came to do some ads also. Was she in Kabul Bank ads?
So this program, my brother said, let's go and dub these programs, which we did. We bought it from Star Television, dubbed them into Dari and Pashto. People were missing evening prayers as a result of this show. It was just, the nation was obsessed.
Just to watch the show.
Just to watch the show. And it became, so Marshal Fahim, the vice president, and quite a well-known Mujahideen fighter, it was his favorite show. So he referenced the characters in the show when discussing politics. He'd say, well, this character's like this guy, and he would have a long table, a bit like the scene from, what was it, that Al Pacino film? Not Goodfellas. Which one?
Godfather?
No, the one that he's sitting around the table and he starts, Kevin Costner and not Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. But anyway, he used to give these speeches. And in every speech, he'd reference the characters from Kyunki Saas Bahi. And it was transformative for the country because it was the first time. But then people started to dress like Indian characters and so forth, and getting furniture that they would see on television.
I even heard, I don't know how accurate this is, that there was a branch of Kabul Bank that was robbed because the guards were sitting and watching the 8 o'clock run of Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi. Ambassador, the 15, 16 years before you came, there was a period in the 90s that India was not in Afghanistan. Just now there's more of a presence than actually the previous time the Taliban were. When you saw the connection between the two peoples, right? This is an example, but also the music that was being played, your conversations. What was your sense of that relationship, the people-to-people relationship that had withstood even a big gap of sort of Indian absence, formal absence there?
Well, I have to say that despite all the dangers and pressures of living and working over there, we've talked about attacks and suicide bombings and what have you, and some of those came up and close and personal to me as well. We can talk about that. But there was I felt completely at home right from day one. I mean, I was received with such love and warmth. All the stories that I heard, part of my family is Pashto speaking from Peshawar, etc. And they used to trade with Afghanistan. So I've kind of grew up with those stories. We have in the Indian imagination delightful stories by Rabindranath Tagore of Kabuliwala, and one of the finest films ever, and one of the finest title songs ever that you can imagine from that. So there was all that. As the ambassador of India, a country that was the most loved, I mean, series after series of surveys, etc. India was the most loved and trusted country by far for Afghans. And so that is the milieu that I landed in. Felt perfectly at home, felt very, very good that we had this trust, as it were, between us, people to people, and I'm not talking of governments here, and that they know that we'll be there. So we did scholarships. We hosted their cricket team was based out of India. We had given them a home ground in Noida. We were doing all these projects, etc., that I'm telling you about. We were bringing in humanitarian assistance. We were opening up alternate routes into Afghanistan that hopefully would serve for the future as well. So that's the milieu I landed in. So it was such a privilege, really. I mean, I have no hesitation in saying till today, the finest posting ever in my 36-year diplomatic career.
And the fact that your family got to visit as well, despite difficult reality, that they got to see a little bit of the country as well.
Yes, despite all that, but you find your way around it. I discovered very shortly after I landed there that somehow intrinsically, I wasn't scared. Intrinsically, because I think fear is something that is very internal. People react differently to security situations or dangerous situations. Fortunately for me, I didn't have any fear from inside telling me, hey man, somehow get over this couple of years in Kabul and go back to somewhere better. So that helped, because I would tell my security detail that I need to go here or there and do this and that, and please, figure out how to keep me safe. And they did a marvelous job, so I didn't feel constrained by that at all. And then, of course, there was what Saad described. What he described just now is emblematic, really, of the new Afghanistan, that this foreign involvement post-2001 led to. So it was a brave new world. You had the bravery of these young Afghans who Saad mentions, that they recruited, their passion, their determination to do a good job. So these youngsters at Tolo TV and Arman FM were doing a fantastic job. I mean, I've attended shows at their studios. I've been interviewed by them, etc. So it was emblematic of this hope that across this JLF festival, we've been talking of how essentially human beings are the same everywhere. Same aspirations, same patriotism, do something for your country, make a living for yourself, take care of your family, build a better world. All that was there, so it was such a joy really to be in this country where all these energy was bubbling. Yet we knew that things were not always will always remain the same. I mean, you mentioned Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi, and it was such a hugely popular show, and Saad has mentioned it. It was also true that conservatism in Afghan society, which one has to respect, led to many, many scenes in that where, the Saas or the Bahu is doing their daily prayer to Ganesh or whoever, where Tolo TV had to pixelate the images of gods because they would get complaints from some, so they were practical enough. So we all found our way to live around the constraints that the situation imposed upon us. But we never, I think, gave up hope that we are going to do something. I, as the representative of India and my country, will do something. He, as a proud young Afghan with passion and ambition and the energy to do and create what he created. You must read the book. It's an awesome story of how Saad created what he created. Very, very successful company, still running till today.
Actually, the one thing, Mujib, remember that a lot of the Pakistanis traveling to Afghanistan had to pretend they were Indian. Right.
You guys have probably followed the debate in Washington about soft power and the importance of soft power, and that is the way it's being done away with. If one thing that we learned from the Indian experience in Afghanistan was the importance of that soft power, that India's dollar could actually achieve a lot more goodwill because it was being spent on top of a cultural connection that was there. That recognition helped the softer side of the. We will sort of jump forward to what happened with the unraveling. I want to give two examples of the kind of conversation that institutions that people like Saad built started in Afghanistan. He had there was a program on Arman FM on radio show. It was called Shab-e-Ashiqan, which means the night of the lovers. This was a beautiful concept where people would call in during the week and they would leave their love stories. And as you can imagine, in most of South Asia, but in Afghanistan in particular, these are mostly stories of heartbreak. So they would record their stories, and then the producers would select the top stories of the week, and there was an anchor who would sort of stitch this together. This sort of sorrowful voice, a woman or a man recounting their story, and then the producer would select a song, often a Bollywood song, that would go with that experience. And this would air 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and the listeners would be taxi drivers. The listeners would be people who were not at home watching television, who were not at home watching Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi. But that was the kind of sort of unburdening that people were doing with a medium like radio. But there was also, when we got closer to the later stage, I wanted to read the account of one young reporter that worked for Tolo, Samim, who was killed in one of these attacks. He was this beautiful young reporter. He went out to report on one bombing that had happened at a wrestling club. As he was standing outside that wrestling club reporting live on television, a second bomb went off, and he was killed while he was doing his live on television. And his reflections on his Facebook page came out after that. How conflicted he was between the hope of this place, but also how corrupted it had become, how violent it had become. And I was at their studios the next day watching Saad's colleagues report live on the funeral of their fellow journalists, and I was writing about it. And this is what we wrote in the New York Times. As he reported for years on the killings of civilians around him, the Afghan reporter Samim Faramars grappled with the idea of mortality in a country where violent deaths are overwhelming daily reality. We live death, Mr. Faramars, a 28-year-old reporter of Tolu News, wrote on his Facebook page. But this part of it gets us to the next part of our conversation. Has anyone asked, this is a quote from him, has anyone asked who are the lucky ones? Who are the luckier ones? Those who die in terrorist attacks and leave this world, or those who are living to see the oppression with their own eyes? He is going through these thoughts as he's living it, as he's reporting on it, but this reality is sinking in that what is coming is a darker future. As sort of the clock started ticking, Saad, how are you feeling in terms of trying to hold on to what you had built, the vision that was in it, a different Afghanistan that it represented, as sort of the peace talks were not going well, the violence was going up, it was clear that the Americans were leaving. Take us to sort of what you were thinking, what you were going through as you were watching that period.
It was difficult in that sometimes I think that nothing was worth the loss. As a matter of fact, when I was in Mumbai, because we had an operation in India, that I received news that there had been an attack, and at the same time, our employees were not picking up their phones in the west of Kabul. And then it dawned on us that this may be our bus. As they were reporting live on this attack, not knowing that this was their colleagues. And that's the attack where we lost 7 of our employees and dozens of others injured, some
And
permanently.
not all of them were reporters. Those were some of entertainment people. There were some.
As a matter of fact, none were reporters, but they worked for the organization. I flew back, and then the next time I talk about this in the book, that I gave a speech, 700 people showed up, and I said to them that I would have no hesitation shutting down the station. Nothing was worth it, because at the end of the day, you ask yourself, what is it that we're here to do in life? But loss of life, when it's that personal, it's difficult to be principled in terms of we're going to maintain this operation, we're going to do all of this. I put it to the employees, but I actually meant it. For me, I was ready to walk away from it. But it's a question you ask yourself every day. Samim was a very philosophical young man, and he was killed along with his colleague while reporting live. And that also was very traumatic for his colleagues, the person that sent him to cover the story and what he had to deal with. And there's a chapter about him where he took time off and went to the most remote part of Afghanistan and in the Wakhan, northeast of the country, to come to terms with what had happened. We're a deeply traumatized nation, and people always talk about the Afghans as being resilient, but we're sick and tired of being resilient, I think. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure of anything anymore. I mean, we keep going, but it's difficult. I'm hopeful about the country and its people longer term, but I question everything else, especially in terms of our role.
Ambassador, in that end game, in that final stretch, I know you've moved on, you're not in Kabul, and sort of the younger Afghans, those who had hope of a democratic country, they're grappling with the questions that Saad is mentioning and sort of the imminent doom of that. In terms of India and India's security interests, India's investments in that country, as the end game was playing out, what kind of options did India have at play? And how did that how much of a factor was India in the way the end game played out?
Well, I wish I could say that we were a factor and we could have made much of a difference. Unfortunately, no, despite our significant presence there, despite the fact that we were the most loved country there, most trusted country there. The arbiters of Afghanistan was really the West, led by the United States. All the trillions of dollars and all the war effort that was required largely came from them. The fact is that we've invested about $3 billion in Afghanistan. I'd like to think that our $3 billion have actually made more difference than $300 billion in some cases of what the West has spent there. You feel that it's such a promise lost, really. So, I mean, my overwhelming regret here, not personal, but my overwhelming regret here is that the world gave up what was actually a winnable war. I insist, and nobody can convince me that this was a situation from which withdrawal, and of course the messy way in which it happens is a separate matter, but withdrawal in itself was a necessity at all. In fact, it's a disaster that the West has forgotten and withdrawn from Afghanistan.
We have 5 minutes, just one last sort of topic, and then we will open it up to questions. If we come to today, the reality, it's been three and a half years that the Taliban are in power. Half of the population, the women, are basically deprived of any public role, including the most basic rights to an education beyond 6th grade. So we have young girls now who are in the 4th and 5th grade who are dreading what does it mean once you finish the 6th grade. Whether you flunked yourself so you can continue one more year, or if you graduate, if you're a top student, that means you don't continue school. There is increased poverty. Yes, the violence is down, but we went from one extreme of ridiculous violence where in a small country there were daily death tolls of 50, 60 to a space of complete oppression. We went from one extreme to the other. In this space, Saad, you face two choices. One is you shut down, you give up, and you say, that failed, it didn't work. The other is, the choice you've made, is you continue. It is the same studios, mostly it's the same people. You've recruited along with a lot of younger reporters, new reporters, to replace those who left the country. And there are two impressions of this. Some are saying you are whitewashing the oppression that is happening by creating a pretense of normalcy. Others are saying this is a place that goes through a cycle. It will find its way out of this oppression again. Can we hold on to something until we come out of that cycle? So that's what you're doing. Others are saying that's what you're doing. You're giving people some sense of normalcy to hold on to until the day after comes. How do you reckon with these sort of two narratives, the fact that you have stayed on and continued operating?
Again, I'm not quite sure, actually. It is the new normal. I mean, yeah, it is what we're facing today is the new normal. We're not the only ones who are on the ground. The Indians have an embassy there, the Europeans are there, the UN is there. You still have to take into account that 40 million Afghans reside in that country. We don't have music, we don't have Indian soap operas, but we have game shows and other forms of entertainment, which people continue to watch. But I think that one of the most important things we're doing is, for example, education programs. So we're doing, for example, maths and biology, physics and chemistry for grades 7, 8, and 9. And we'll expand that. Now, it's not an alternative to a formal education system, but it's a temporary solution. It's a bridge between what we had and what we may have in the future. So we're doing a lot of things that we think is helping society. But it's a question, I mean, we don't know. I mean, every day we ask ourselves, should we persist or should we just walk away? And perhaps do it from outside the country. But having that access inside is also important because not only are we able to get news out, Afghans are, being informed on a daily basis, but we also have the presence on the ground to let the world outside know what's transpiring inside of Afghanistan. It's a difficult situation. The one interesting thing to note is that Afghanistan is a changed country from, say, 2001. As much as the Taliban are attempting to change Afghanistan, the new Afghanistan is also changing the Taliban on the ground. We are seeing this tug of war I'm not quite sure who's going to prevail. And we're seeing, within the Taliban system, there is also another tug of war in terms of what the pragmatists want and the more hardcore Taliban are insisting on. The game is far from over. I don't think we should give up. I'm eternally optimistic. But at the same time, we have to be pretty realistic.
Ambassador, last question to you. The goodwill, the great relationship that was built through a lot of hard work, reaching out to people, the investment. There's an impression also that India kind of cut and run when that difficult moment came, that the level of relationship to the people was actually reduced to much less than the first time the Taliban took over in the 90s, that the scholarships that had created incredible goodwill in Afghanistan, there were students who were left halfway and they couldn't come back to India because India stopped issuing visas, completely shut its borders. The medical clinics and hospitals here that were a great, great source of relief to Afghans, they came in huge numbers. Visas stopped. On the one hand, one understands the security challenge. The country becomes a black box. India wants to protect itself, and India doesn't want any kind of people to come in. On the other hand, this is a great government. It's got a great diplomatic service, security service, who could actually, put in processes that distinguish between those who need to come here and those who are a threat. When you look at the space now, do you feel that we have lapsed into a difficult sort of a relationship, and the relationship has gone back, that in this moment of difficulty, India could not provide actually what the people are counting on?
Well, I was High Commissioner to Australia in August of 2021 when the events happened and the Taliban came back. So I wasn't really part of the processes or in any capacity at all where I can know what was the thinking or behind the scenes. But from what I gather is that, of course, around that middle of August and on the 15th of August, the way everything fell apart and the chaos that was evident over there, everybody was shutting down. So were we, because you obviously don't want your personnel to be in harm's way. So cutting and running was for a reason of security and not of cutting and running from Afghanistan. Because as you know, we don't maintain an embassy there, but we do have some officials there. We resumed humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan within a few months. We sent that because that was required by the people over there. Now, I don't agree, of course, with the certain policies that were followed subsequently. I do think those students and those who were in India should have had their visas extended. They should have allowed to. Like I said, I can't say what was the thinking or fear or dynamics behind those decisions. But recently, we've heard that the small development projects might resume again, without having to reopen an embassy there or get into the question of recognition, etc. And perhaps, gradually that would lead to resumption of visas as well. But yes, I do feel that that policy could have been differently run.
I think our time is up. I don't know if we have time for maybe two questions quickly, and then we'll wrap it up. Just right there, the gentleman in white, and then the madam in green in front.
I have a very simple question. Is there any hope for Afghan people, especially women? Will there be another golden era, or it will be in conflict for another developed nation like it has been for last 50 years? What are your thoughts on that?
And we'll take the second question also, and then we answer.
My question is for Saad. This is from a writing perspective. Do you think anonymity begets value when you are writing from such a tumultuous ground and giving your name, your story? Do you think there's a censorship when it comes to revealing identity?
Saad, both questions to you.
Well, I think, and both questions are somehow related, and I'll explain why. I think, firstly, I think we should not lose hope. And if the changes are to come, in particular with women's rights, they have to come from within. I think the international pressure perhaps is sometimes even counterproductive. I think March of last year, we worked out that we had done over 2,000 stories on why women need to go back to school. Roundtables, town hall meetings, news stories, current affairs programs, and we've continued to do that. We've lost count now. So we are being as vocal as possible from within the country to ensure that these changes come. And of course, we're also amplifying a lot of Taliban voices who are advocating for women's rights. And to your point, I think, yes, I think when you're writing a memoir, you're cognizant of who you're going to upset. But I think, obviously, there's a balance. But I think it's also important for people to have the courage to speak up and to be as honest as possible, for your own sake and for the sake of the country.
And Ambassador, last comment from you on the future of that country.
Yeah, well, crystal ball gazing. There's still hope. I'm a absolute committed optimist. If there's no hope, there's no reason for life. Saad's book will also show you that post the return of the Taliban, he's still getting young girls and young boys coming to be recruited by Tolo TV, and they're still working. So they still have those dreams and aspirations. Now, how their life will change, in the absence of anyone really trying to help them in any direct way, change will have to come from within. What form that change will take? Will the Taliban itself change? There are divisions within the Taliban. Saad has just alluded to it. Will there be public pressure building up in such a manner that they have to give way? Or will the 20 million Afghan girls and women, let alone 40 million total Afghan people, will they just be forgotten and will have an interminable wait? I can't say, but let's hope that things will change.
Do we have time for no? So I will close it on a reference to the censorship question. Saad's life is much more colorful than what we see in the book. The book is more a story of the media operation, so we will not count this as a memoir. Hopefully, an actual memoir. A few years down the line, maybe we'll be back in jail if talking about that and more stories from that. Thank you very much. Thank you.